Well, after weeks of infighting in the Liberal Party, particularly in recent days, a big battle over pre-selections in New South Wales, the Prime Minister, in what was the final Coalition Party Room meeting of the year today, told his MPs this. The Prime Minister saying it's time to move into full engagement with the enemy. Who is the enemy? He's not talking about anyone internal. He's not talking about the moderates versus the Conservatives. And just to clear up any confusion here in Parliament this afternoon, he made it clear who that enemy is by taking them on directly himself.
I can assure the Labor Party members opposite that on this side of the House, we're going to fight for a stronger economy. We're going to fight for lower taxes, Mr Speaker. We're going to fight for small and family businesses. We're going to fight for mums and dads. We're going to fight for those Australians who haven't got the time to go around and get on Twitter and wear T-shirts and turn up at protests, Mr Speaker.
Scott Morrison in full battle mode there, taking on the enemy on the other side. And you could see there the backbench enjoying for once, for the first time in a long time, the opportunity to look and sound united, to rally behind their leader, to show a bit of enthusiasm from the backbench, which they certainly did. But as much as they might have been trying to show that unified front in taking on the enemy, well, a reminder again from the deposed Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull that he's there to remind them of some of the difficulties they've had on not just policy areas, but some of these pre-selection areas as well. Today, Malcolm Turnbull has weighed in again on the National Energy Guarantee, pointing out, reminding everyone that, yes, this was the government's policy to bring down prices and bring down emissions as well. Along the way, we've also seen the government having to shift ground a little again on its energy policy, this big stick divestment policy, as it's called. Some within the Liberal Party raising concerns in that party room meeting today about a Liberal government mucking around in the private sector, sticking its fingers into what should be private business decisions on keeping or selling assets. This divestment power could force energy companies to break up, to hive off assets that they would rather keep, like a coal-fired power station, for example. Scott Morrison, in response to some of these concerns from at least 4 MPs, I'm told, in the Coalition Party Room meeting today, had this to say about the way the energy market works at the moment. The energy market is not a free market nirvana. It's a bastardised market with elevated rates of return. In other words, some of these power companies are ripping us off. They're making decisions on their assets to inflate, to elevate their prices. So what's the government done today? It has tried to address some of these concerns from backbenchers, and certainly the concerns from the business sector. And we just heard from Innes Willicks at the Australian Industry Group, grave disappointment about the very idea of a government forcing the divestment of assets from private sector companies who've paid for and built these assets, then being told what to do by the government. So in response, the government's not dropping it altogether, but it is injecting, it is inserting a new judicial oversight. So the federal court would now have to approve any divestment of a power company asset. The Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, said it's a better policy outcome.
Policy is actually better for this consultation. This policy is actually the product of proper consultation and feedback and input, and this is about putting in place the right checks and balances. Well,
better checks and balances, yes. Industry, though, still gravely concerned about what this might mean. How would the federal court decide whether a company should divest an asset? Would the federal court have to weigh evidence from whom? The ACCC, who reckons they should divest an asset, from the company itself, who reckons they should be able to keep what they've built and paid for? Would it have to weigh up what's in the customer's best interest? The shareholders who've invested on good faith grounds in a company, would they have to weigh that up? How would they actually do this? There's still a lot of murkiness around this policy area itself. And perhaps unusually, it's the Labor Party who's siding with business on this. They oppose this divestment idea altogether.
Its so-called big stick has overnight become a much littler stick. This ridiculous policy, this Venezuelan-style intervention, this intervention in the economy which would chill investment, has collapsed under its own weight.
And as I said, industry is still very worried about this divestment approach, this divestment power, even with the changes that have been made today to water it down. Innes Willicks telling us just a short while ago, the government may have stepped back from the abyss, but only just.
We really don't think that, you know, the step back is very positive, but is there really a need for this sort of new set of arrangements at all? It's not the right way to go, is essentially what we're saying.
So you still think even with this safeguard of having federal court involvement, you're still opposed to it?
We're very dubious about it. We haven't seen yet the details of how it would work, because this is, again, uncharted waters. You know, who would make a referral to the ACCC in the first place? How would the ACCC start an inquiry and investigation? What form would that investigation take? Look, it's really murky. It's very murky. We question prima facie very much why it's necessary at all.
But on this one, this divestment power, don't forget it was actually Malcolm Turnbull, certainly under the Prime Ministership of Malcolm Turnbull, that this was adopted as coalition policy. Along the way, at the time, as the National Energy Guarantee was unravelling. Now, Malcolm Turnbull today is way back in on this. He was addressing a smart energy conference in Sydney, laying out what's happening in the market, this move to renewables is unstoppable, he argued. He pointed to the prices now being achieved by firmed renewables. That means wind and solar that is either backed up by gas or batteries or hydro, so that it is available 24/7, dispatchable power. This price point now is coming down so much and will over the coming year, after a huge, more than $1 billion list of investments from Snowy Hydro, in fact, over the last few months, that it will come down below 70 megawatts, $70 a megawatt hour, and that is going to be, in about a year's time, below that of certainly new coal-fired power. So the argument from Malcolm Turnbull today was, we don't need to subsidise renewables anymore, right? They're fine. They're competitive. That's where the industry is going. But he is still mounting the argument for the National Energy Guarantee, reminding everyone that it is still the way to get prices down and emissions down at the same time as making the system more reliable. Now, he's right. This was the government's policy. It was supported by the party room, and not to trawl through all that happened in that messy fortnight of leadership chaos, it only then unravelled after a small group of Liberal backbenchers started to raise concerns, and then that group itself started to grow and grow, and Malcolm Turnbull himself realised he couldn't put it to a vote in Parliament. He didn't want to rely on Labor supporting the policy and have the look of, well, a significant number of his own MPs crossing the floor. So they Malcolm Turnbull shelved the legislation on emissions reduction. Today, however, his reminder was of the merits of the National Energy Guarantee, and a little reminder along the way of who was supporting it the loudest.
At the risk of being criticised for speaking about politics, which apparently former Prime Ministers aren't allowed to do, I would, according to some of the media, I strongly encourage my colleagues to work together to revive the National Energy Guarantee. It was a vital piece of economic policy and had strong support, and none stronger, I might say, than that of the current Prime Minister and the current Treasurer.
And as I say, Malcolm Turnbull is quite right to point to the history on this, where Scott Morrison was, where Josh Frydenberg certainly was as the architect of the National Energy Guarantee. But saying this now, when we know the government has dropped it and moved on for all the reasons that have been so well ventilated, certainly doesn't help the Morrison government to point out that they're on the wrong path when it comes to a crucial area of government policy, as well as his criticisms over recent days about pre-selections, where he's at odds with what Scott Morrison's done here to protect sitting MPs like Craig Kelly in New South Wales. So this is a reminder of the split becoming something of a chasm now between Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison. Anyway, it gave plenty of fodder to the Labor Party this afternoon in question time.
Does the current Prime Minister agree with the recently retired former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, who said today about the National Energy Guarantee, and I quote, "It was a vital piece of economic policy. It had strong support, and none stronger, I might say, than that of the current Prime Minister and the current Treasurer."
Now, they might like to dress up their 45% emissions reduction target as a national energy guarantee, but what it is a 45% emissions reduction target, which is a thumping big electricity tax, Mr Speaker.
The Prime Minister not really answering Labor's question there, instead pointing to the fact that Labor's suggesting a 45% emissions reduction target. And this is a legitimate area for the government to go to because, yes, plenty of business and industry groups backed the National Energy Guarantee, but not many of them backed the 45% version of it that Labor's taking to the election. As we saw earlier, Innes Willox, head of the Australian Industry Group, was talking to us. But he does agree with Malcolm Turnbull that the National Energy Guarantee is still a far better approach than anything the government's looking at now.
We keep coming back to the neg. I hate to say it, it's sort of been up in the news in recent hours again, but we keep coming back to that. Not the perfect solution, but a framework that could work, that would have an impact on energy reliability and which over time would drive down prices. Look, the fact here is that this is, is a quagmire, it's a bog that's been created. Some within Parliament House where we sit say it's been the worst piece of public policy making in a couple of generations, and may well be so. But the neg at least gave us a pathway out that within business could accept. Wasn't perfect for everybody, but at least gave them a pathway out.
Well, not going as far as saying he hopes Labor wins the election. He did say, Innes Willox, that he hopes Labor implements this National Energy Guarantee. Worth a reminder, though, Bill Shorten said he'll only do it in government if there's bipartisan support from the coalition. Who knows what sort of shape the coalition may be in opposition if they lose the election. A lot of hypotheticals there.